Welcome to the CST Flight Services video series. I'm Rick Gardner, and in this video, we're going to talk about the regulations and procedures for flying to a place that's near and dear to my heart, which is the Bahamas, which is where I'm from. Now, in addition to this video, we also highly recommend that you watch our video on documents and equipment for international flight, as well as U.S. regulations for departing and arriving in the United States. You can find a link to those right here. Let's take a look at what to expect as far as weather is concerned. The weather in the Bahamas is, well, great. It's one of the reasons we want to go. Surface winds are normally out of the east. That's the prevailing wind. And during the summer months, the rainy season, we do need to keep an eye out for hurricanes that could pose a threat. During the winter, we get occasional cold fronts, so you might get a day or two of blustery weather. The winds will be out of the northwest or north, but usually that settles down very quickly and we're back to the normal sunny weather of the Bahamas. During the summer months, convective heating can sometimes produce afternoon rain showers. During hurricane season, I make the National Hurricane Center website my homepage for my web browser. Hopefully, if you do the same and you look at their website, it'll look like this. Get to the seat, no hurricanes. The CST member website weather page contains a wide variety of products for international weather. Now, CST does not produce any of that weather, but we have identified a number of sources for good, reliable international weather. And we have grouped links to those sources on our webpage in a format that pilots will find familiar. Let's move on to charts. There are two VFR charts that are published by the FAA, the Caribbean 1 and Caribbean 2 charts. But please note that the FAA has begun to reduce the amount of information in detail on those charts. You can, however, download them from the CST member website. There are also two IFR charts, also published by the FAA, that cover the Bahamas. And those can also be downloaded from the CST member website. Now let's take a look at the routes for getting to the Bahamas. The first thing that you might want to consider is to plan a route that keeps you over land and shallow water as much as possible. The Bahamas sits atop two large sandbanks, which you can see in the image as the dark blue areas. So sometimes the best route between 2 points is not always a best line. Besides, flying over small islands and sandbars is a heck of a lot prettier than flying over that dark blue deep water. Another great thing about flying to the Bahama Islands is that they're really not that far away and not far apart from each other. If you look at a route departing Fort Pierce, Florida, the distances to the furthest popular destinations are well within the capabilities of most single-engine aircraft. Similarly, if you depart from Fort Lauderdale, Miami area, the distances are also easily accessible. The next important consideration when planning your route is to choose International Airports of Entry, or AOEs. When flying internationally, we must always enter and depart from a country through an AOE. The Bahamas has made that very easy by providing at least one international AOE on every major island. Another important consideration is fuel availability. When planning a fuel stop in the Bahamas, you should always check fuel availability ahead of time before committing to that airport. While most fuel suppliers will take credit cards, we always recommend to bring cash just in case the day you arrive there's a problem with a credit card terminal. Nonetheless, I also always recommend to plan an alternate, just in case. You never know. There are 7 airports in the Bahamas with Avgas and 8 airports with Jet A. You can find information on AOEs and fuel prices for airports in the Bahamas in the Bahamas section of the CST member website, along with the ICAO and IATA codes for airports, their runway lengths, airport elevation, and more. This information is updated twice a month when possible. Flying to the Bahamas requires life jackets and a life raft. so you'll need to pick them up somewhere before you depart. There are FBOs located at designated airports in South Florida that will rent these to you. If you can select one of those FBOs that is convenient for your departure, then you can rent the equipment, and then on your return to the U.S., once you've finished clearing with U.S. Customs and Border Protection, you can return them to the FBO. Sometimes the geography of an island will not allow the runway to be aligned with the prevailing wind. So if you're rusty on your crosswind landings, you might want to brush up on that before you go. You will also find a handy guide on airports in the Bahamas in a PDF format, which you can download from the CST member website. Take note that there are restrictions when flying within 25 DME of the Nassau VOR. Just because a fuel truck is working today does not mean it's going to be working tomorrow. Always plan on having enough fuel to take you to an alternate, just in case. Always select an alternate that has the characteristics necessary for you, such as, are they an AOE if you need one, and do they have fuel if you will be needing fuel. Now let's talk about what is required to fly to, within, and from the Bahamas. One common question we get from pilots is if they can fly their experimental aircraft or their light sport aircraft to the Bahamas. The answer is yes. The Bahamas welcomes those aircraft, provided you bring with you on board a copy of the standardized validation of a special airworthiness certificate. This document is not tail specific. You just have to download it, print it, and have it inside your aircraft to comply with the regulations. You can download a copy of that document from the Bahamas page on the CST member website. It's important to review a few important things about air traffic control in the Bahamas. The first is that Miami Center controls the airspace over the Bahamas above 6,000 feet. The Bahamas is the only country we know of that allows flight plans for flights from the Bahamas back to the U.S. to be filed with ATC and Flight Service in the U.S. However, the exceptions are Nassau and Freeport, where there you will have to file the flight plans locally with air traffic control. The Bahamas allows U.S. Flight Service and air traffic control to have remote communications outlets in the Bahamas to facilitate communications. The common traffic advisory frequency for aerodromes in the Bahamas, other than Freeport, Nassau, and Exuma, is 122.8. Note that there is no night VFR in the Bahamas, and the Bahamas does not require your aircraft to have a 406 megahertz emergency locator transmitter, or ELT. Now, when we arrive in the Bahamas, we're going to differentiate between flights that departed the US versus flights that departed other countries in the Caribbean. The Bahamas requires that you make your first landing in their country at an AOE. It doesn't have to be the first AOE that you cross. It just needs to be the first landing, whichever is most convenient for you. You must close your flight plan regardless if you were IFR or VFR. Otherwise, you could trigger a search and rescue operation. If you are flying into Nassau or Freeport, the tower will close your IFR or your VFR flight plans for you. Otherwise, IFR flight plans need to be closed with Miami Center in the air or on the ground via cell phone. If you are VFR, canceling flight following does not close your flight plan. You still have to contact Flight Service to close your VFR flight plan. You can contact Flight Service either through an RCO in the air. There's one over Grand Bahama near Freeport and one over Nassau. Or you can do it via your app or a cell phone or telephone once you're on the ground. If you are unable for some reason to get through to Miami Flight Service, US Flight Service, then you can contact Nassau Flight Service as well, and they can assist you in closing your flight plan. Flight Service RCO frequencies as well as telephone numbers are available on the CST member website. Just like flights from the US, flights from other Caribbean countries to the Bahamas must also make their first landing at an AOE. you should bring with you a copy of the outward general declaration form that you were given when you departed the Caribbean country, because the Bahamas customs officials may ask to see that. It basically verifies, proves your country of origin. Also, like flights from the US, you've got to close your flight plan to prevent search and rescue. However, in this case, it has to be done directly with Nassau Flight Service. If you land in Nassau, Freeport, or Exuma, they will automatically close your flight plans for you. Upon landing from a flight from the US or from the Caribbean, you will have to complete an inward general declaration form. In the Bahamas, these are known as the C7A. You can download a PDF fillable version of that form from the CST member website, or you may find them at the customs office in the airport in the Bahamas when you land. The C7A is sometimes referred to as a cruising permit, but note that you must fill out 3 copies and that you should receive one of those copies with a Bahamas customs stamp before you leave the airport. Don't lose that copy. It proves that your aircraft entered the country legally. When you present your C7A, you will also be charged a processing fee. You will also need to fill out a Bahamas immigration card for each person in the group. You will receive a copy of that card. Don't lose it, because you will have to surrender it when you depart the Bahamas. Airport and government fees in the Bahamas are amongst the lowest in the Caribbean. Upon arrival, a private aircraft will be charged a processing fee of $50. Now, if your aircraft is in the name of a corporation or is being flown by professional pilots, it could be considered under Bahamas customs regulations as a commercial. And again, this is customs, not aviation, and therefore could be charged a $75 fee inbound and a $75 fee outbound. This is at the discretion of the customs officer. Landing fees and parking fees at public airports are also very reasonable. However, landing and parking fees in Nassau are a little higher, and landing fees at Norman's Key in the Exuma Island chain are extremely high. So check before you go. Note that if you use the services of an FBO in the Bahamas, they may have additional fees for parking and ramp services and for the use of their facilities. Some of those fees, however, can be waived if you take on fuel while you're there. The Bahamas departure tax is $29 per person, and it does include the crew. Flying with the Bahamas can be incredibly exciting and fun. The views are spectacular. What you need to remember when you fly your aircraft within the Bahamas is that wherever Bahamas Customs is present, you will need to have that C7A form that you were given. It will have to be stamped before you depart and stamped when you land. So let's look at an example. Suppose you departed the Fort Lauderdale Executive Airport and you landed in North Eleuthera. There, you will complete all your forms and they'll give you your C7A with a single Bahamas Customs stamp with you. Let's say a day or two later, you decide to go to Staniel Key to visit with the swimming pigs or the Thunderball Grotto. You go back out to the airport at North Eleuthera, you take your C7 to Bahamas Customs, and now they will stamp you out. Get in your plane, you fly to Staniel Key, you land, there's no Bahamas Customs in Staniel Key. What do? Nothing. You go see the swimming pigs. And once you're done, go back to your airplane. What do? Nothing. There's no Bahamas Customs. Get in your plane. And now let's say you fly to Stella Maris, where Bahamas Customs is present. As soon as you land, you go into the customs office and they'll stamp you in. It's as simple as that. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, and visiting the Bahamas is one of those things. So when it gets time for you to go, remember that you must depart the Bahamas, regardless if you're going to the US or to the Caribbean, through an AOE, Airport of Entry. Once you've selected the AOE, then you need to file a flight plan. If you are departing from Nassau or Freeport to any destination, you will have to file that flight plan locally. Otherwise, we suggest you file it with Flight Service. If you are flying to the US from another Bahamian airport, then you can file your IFR flight plan like you normally do in the US with whatever app or website you deem suitable. For your DVFR flight plan to cross the ATIS returning to the US, those have to be filed directly with Flight Service in the US. Remember, we cover this in the US regulation section. You must also file your APIS manifest with US Customs and Border Protection. Next, you must return your C-7A to the customs officer. You must also return your immigration form. And then when leaving the Bahamas, you must present an outward general declaration form. And those in the Bahamas are called a C-7. These can be downloaded in PDF fillable format from the CST member website, or you can fill them out by hand there at the departure airport, whichever you prefer, and you will need 3 copies. When departing the Bahamas for the Caribbean, you need to be sure that you bring with you 1 stamped copy to be able to demonstrate to the authorities at the Caribbean country where you land that you came from the Bahamas. And once you're done, don't forget, you still need to pay your $29 per person departure tax and whatever other fees are owed to the airport or to the FBO. Let's cover a few additional tips for flying to or from the Bahamas under IFR. IFR flights should feel just like a domestic IFR flight in the US. Although there are published approaches for other airports in the Bahamas, the only ones that are authorized are Nassau and Freeport. As Miami Center controls the airspace above 6,000 feet, and there's no other ATC other than Nassau and Freeport, you will have to climb into Miami's airspace above 6,000 feet when departing from any airport other than Nassau or Freeport. And there, contact Miami Center to request your clearance and get your discrete squawk code. Be careful when you are departing a Bahamian airport near the ATIS to avoid penetrating the ATIS until you have activated your flight plan and you have been issued your discrete transponder code by US ATC or by Flight Service in the US. For VFR flights, the Bahamas is the only country we are aware of that allows you to file your DVFR flight plan from the Bahamas back to the US with ATC, in this case Flight Service, in the US. When you call Miami Flight Service, they may provide you with your discrete transponder code. However, there are certain circumstances where that code may change between the time they give it to you by telephone and the time you go to activate your flight plan. So don't be surprised. Nonetheless, you still have to contact Miami Flight Service once you are in the air to activate your flight plan and either to confirm or provide you with a new discrete transponder code to penetrate the ATIS. If you happen to transition through the Nassau Terminal Control Area, they may issue you their discrete squawk code while you are in their airspace. If that happens, do as they instruct. However, once you have transitioned through, do not forget to go back to the discrete squawk code you were issued either by Miami Center, if you had requested flight following after activating your flight plan, or the code that you were given by Flight Service when you activated your flight plan. Nonetheless, unless you want to be center stage at your very own military air show, you never want to penetrate the ATIS squawking 1200 or a code issued by any ATC other than US ATC or US Flight Service. You can download an airport guide which contains a lot of other useful information in addition to airport information, and you can also download Bahamian forms from the Bahamas page of the CST member website. This concludes our video on planning a trip to the Bahamas. We hope that you found this information useful and that you take advantage of the other videos in the CST Flight Services video series. For any additional information, visit the CST member website.